Awesome. Thank you, Mel. And my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I will be, I'm calling in from the occupied territory of the Lenape people. So before we get started, we want to make sure that we get us grounded and situated in our language justice, you know, message that we want to make sure that everybody is all on the same page and following along and able to follow along. So Melanie is going to kick us off with that.
As free minds, free people, we believe language justice is central to education for liberation. The opening ceremony and plenaries will be in English and Spanish. So participants should join a language channel. Everyone will be able to hear everyone else. But if you select a language channel, you'll be able to also hear the interpreter when there is a language spoken that you don't understand. We create multilingual spaces together, so for those speaking, go slowly. Be mindful of accessibility and one mic. Do not suffer in silence. If the interpretation is not working or you have technical difficulties, please let us know via chat. In a moment, Zoom interpretation will be turned on and you will get to see a globe in the lower part of your screen with a message about interpretation. Click on the globe and select the language you would like to listen to and participate in this session. If you are joining through a smartphone or tablet, you can click on the three dots at the bottom right-hand corner or your screen. Select Language Interpretation, choose your language, click on Done, and you should be ready. Do not click on Mute Original Audio. This slide shows how to access interpretation both on a computer and on the phone. We will now read the instructions in Spanish.
Buenos días a todos. Primero fue la presentación de Okaikor y Melanie. Okaikor dijo que ella, junto con Melanie, van a ser los moderadores del evento de hoy. Melanie dijo que tiene 16 años, viene de Georgia, hogar de los indígenas Catawba, que están en Gwinnett County, lo que se llama Gwinnett County ahora. Y Okaikor dijo que ella usa los pronombres de ella y está en el territorio ocupado de Winailanai. Bueno, y luego el texto para acceder a la interpretación. Dice, como Free Minds, Free People, creemos que la justicia lingüística es fundamental para la educación, para la liberación. La ceremonia de apertura y las sesiones plenarias serán en inglés y en español, por lo que los participantes deberán unirse a un canal lingüístico si quieren escuchar interpretación. Todo el mundo podrá escuchar a los demás, pero si seleccionas el canal de español, podrás escuchar al intérprete en español cuando se hable en inglés. Creamos juntos espacios multilingües, así que para los que hablan, vayan despacio, tengan en cuenta la accesibilidad y un solo micrófono. No sufras en silencio. Si la interpretación no funciona o tienes dificultades técnicas, por favor comunícalo a través del chat. Ya se ha activado la interpretación con Zoom, así que podrás ver un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior a la derecha de tu pantalla con un mensaje sobre la interpretación. Haz clic en el globito, seleccione el idioma en el que deseas escuchar y participar en esta sesión. Si se conecta a través de un teléfono inteligente o una tableta, puede hacer clic en los tres puntitos abajo a la derecha de la pantalla. Seleccione la interpretación de idiomas, elija su idioma, haz clic en Done y estarás listo. No hagas clic en silenciar el audio original. Esta diapositiva muestra cómo acceder a la interpretación tanto en la computadora como en el teléfono.
We will now take this time to read a portion of the Free Minds, Free People Community of Care statement. The entire statement will be placed in the chat for you to access and read at your leisure. Within Free Minds, Free People, we strive to build and sustain a community of care. Doing so requires a lot of tough work. It's easy to romanticize the idea of community and community building and organizing spaces, but we all know there is the potential for activists and organizers to reproduce the same kinds of harm we claim to be opposed to. Does racism go away in organizing spaces? Does sexism, patriarchy, misogynoir, or trans misogynoir disappear in organizing spaces? Does anti-Blackness, settler colonial logic, xenophobia, whiteness, and ableism disappear in spaces committed to social justice? No, they don't. If you're called out for perpetuating any of these things, please understand that it is not because we want to shame or put you down. We, in fact, want to draw you in closer by demonstrating compassion and care and doing the least harm to people in our communities. This is just a portion of our community of care statement, which has been placed in the chat for everyone else to access. So we're going to get started with today's plenary. I'm excited to present to you the folks that we're going to have on our panel. This is, when we think about what's actually happening right now in the country, in this nation, with all the attacks on ethics studies, on all the attacks on critical race theory, this actually gives me hope because it shows that we're winning, right? Because now they're counter organizing, right? It shows that we've made so much ground, we've made so much headway and bringing folks into this movement. Now it's the time for us to start thinking about what does it mean for us to organize and continue to be more proactive in our organizing work and vigilant and principled in the work that we're doing. So you will notice that we will take pauses, and the pauses are because we want to make sure that we're all not leaving anybody behind. So I would like to also take this time to thank our Ethnic Studies and Transnational Solidarity Planning Committee. Many of us are here: Allison, Teresa, Jody, Ezekiel, Raquel, Carlos, Marika, and Lara. Lara is also going to be one of our plenary speakers, but they also helped to put this panel, this plenary together. We met weekly to prepare running into conflict, working through that conflict, but making this possible for all of us here. We want to also thank the entire FMFP coordinating committee members who helped us. If you're off mute, please don't forget to mute yourself so that we can make sure that we're not interrupting speakers when it's time. But thank you. And also these things happen, right? If we were in person, it would have happened too, right? All right. So Mel, do you want to take some time to introduce all speakers?
Yeah. Ashlyn So is a 13-year-old middle school student, fashion designer, and accidental activist. When she saw a video of an Asian elder pushed to the sidewalk and other Asians being bullied, she organized a rally to stand for Asians and against AAPI hate. Seeing the separation happening between the AAPI and Black communities, she organized a gold and Black unity rally to show others that we are one in community in solidarity with one another. Jason Ferreira. Jason is a Associate Professor in the Department of Race and Resistance Studies in the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. He is currently working on the social history of the 1968 Third World Strike at San Francisco State. Guadalupe Carrasco Cardona is an ethnic studies educator in the Los Angeles Unified School District. She is also the chair of Association of Raza Educators and co-founder of the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Coalition. Lara Kiswani is executive director of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center and a faculty member at San Francisco State University in the College of Ethnic Studies. Lara is from Beit Iksa and Akir, Palestine, and was born and raised in San Francisco's Bay Area. Jesse Hagopian is an award-winning educator and a leading voice on issues of educational equity, the school-to-prison pipeline, standardized testing, and the Black Lives Matter school movement and social justice unionism. He is an editor for Rethinking Schools magazine, an author, public speaker, organizer, an ethnic studies teacher at Seattle's Garfield High School, the site of the historic teacher boycott of the MAP test in 2013. Jesse is the co-editor of the books Black Lives Matter at School and Teaching for Black Lives Matter, and the editor of the book More Than a Score, The New Uprising Against High-Stakes Testing. His writings have been published in numerous books, including 101 Changemakers, Rebels and Radicals Who Changed U.S. History, Education and Capitalism, Struggles for Learning and Liberation, Why We Teach Now, and Howard Zinn, and Anthony Arnaud's Voice of a People's History of the United States. Guiding the question for the whole panel, irregardless of place and time, ethnic studies has historically and contemporarily been under attack. This panel tackles the following questions. What's the essence of ethnic studies? Why does the empire find that so threatening? What role does international solidarity play in the fight for decolonial, liberatory education?
Thanks, Mel. And so that's what's going to be centering this conversation as we are going to be moving through this time together and for the weekend, for us to be thinking about how ethnic studies, its role in international solidarity and the fight for decolonial liberatory education, right? A lot of what we do right now seems to be US centered, right? But there is an importance for us to think about this more internationally. And so Jason Ferreira, we're gonna ask you to situate ethnic studies with its internationalist and anti-racist history and principles. If you can talk a little bit more about that for us.
Sure thing. Can everybody hear me? We good? Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully this works. Okay, here. And then hopefully you can see. Okay. Hopefully you can see two posters. Is that right? Okay, great. Thank you for the invitation. I'm I'm a little nervous. One of the reasons I'm nervous is because I got confused and I thought this was like I had 20 minutes and now I have 10 minutes. So I say it's all cool, but if this seems a little bit choppy, it's because I'm actually editing on the run. Okay, so again, thank you for the invitation. And I want to share a little bit about the history of ethnic studies, especially as it relates to the Third World Strike at SF State, with an eye towards these early principles of internationalism and the politics of solidarity. Now, Malcolm famously said, of all our studies, it is history that is best qualified to reward our research. And I've always loved this quote, not simply because I'm a historian in ethnic studies, but because it speaks to our need to do two things. One, to unearth and liberate all of the subjugated histories that exist, to reclaim the Black radical tradition, the long line of Native resistance here on Turtle Island, to the people's histories that so many people have rescued, all by the empire, dangerous memories, dangerous histories. And I would say that the struggle at SF State is one of those subjugated histories too. But secondly, and just as important, as someone once said, there is equally a necessity of guarding against the uncritical practice of merely countering brutalizing lies with righteous lies. History allows us to address the difficulties, the contradictions within our histories, within our movements, and to talk about the things we don't always want to discuss. And in so doing, we can advance via a deeper, more complex understanding of ourselves, our collective weaknesses as much as our strengths, the possibility of a more emancipatory future. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and this is where I'm going to cut a little bit, because of the passing recently of some of our elders. Just quite literally within the last basically a month, Gloria Richardson, who was the leader of the Cambridge movement, Bob Moses, veteran SNCC organizer, and perhaps one of the most important strategists of the Black freedom struggle, along with Ella Baker. Just on Thursday, we lost Janice Mirakitani, a poet and trailblazing activist within the Asian American movement, and along with people like Rupert Garcia and Roberto Vargas, other strike veterans at SF State, the founder of Third World Communications. And then two very close friends and comrades of mine, Elizabeth Petita Martinez, veteran of SNCC, editor of El Grito del Norte in New Mexico, and author of De Colores Means All of Us. And Terry Collins, a veteran of the Third World Strike, who I'm going to talk a little bit about later. How do we lift up their inspiring stories, carrying forward their revolutionary dreams in the face of the historical amnesia so intentionally cultivated within our communities, and simultaneously pay heed to their warnings and wisdom, to the hard-pressed lessons they learned in a lifetime of struggle and about the requirements of struggle? But I also want to start with these movement veterans because, in fact, the genealogy of ethnic studies actually lies in the movement, in organizing, in collective grassroots struggle within our communities, not principally academia, inside an institution, a practice exclusively tied to a pedagogy within the classroom. And we forget this at our peril. In fact, it's one of the unspoken and unresolved contradictions of our work. And part of that is internationalism, the importance of, and it should be said, the hard work of building solidarity. Now, this is where I'm going to cut dramatically. I know that many of you might not know about the strike, and I was going to provide just a quick little snapshot of it, but I'm going to skip that, okay? You have to wait for the book to come out, all right? There's a little teaser. But in short, it was a powerful grassroots movement that shut the institution down for what is still the longest student strike in US history. And people organized based upon a distinct vision that was grounded in community struggle, in serving the people, and it was internationalist in orientation. Okay. Let me come back to Terry. And I want to talk about Terry for a moment because I want to lift him up. You know, he's one of these people that has zero ego. History books, well, when my book comes out, he's going to be in the history book, but he's one of these people that, you know, most histories don't talk about, right? The rank and file of every single movement. But Terry was a key person who shaped the struggle and the vision behind Black studies, Third World studies. And I want to honor him because his life says something about the people and the politics that were in the mix at SF State. Now, Terry didn't know it until the late 1960s when he picked up a copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X, but he was actually related to Malcolm by marriage. His stepmother was Ella Collins, Malcolm's famous sister. Terry grew up for the first 16 years of his life in Connersville, Indiana, and it was there that his politics were shaped. On the one hand, his family were very militant, fierce advocates of Black self-determination. And according to him, it also enabled him to develop a very sharp class consciousness, as at the time, white migrants were coming up from Kentucky, exiles from Appalachia and the coal mines. And so he developed a very sharp class analysis where he could see the commonalities between the poor. At 16, he moved to Los Angeles, attending Dorsey High School on the West Side in the 1950s, where there was a mix of working class Black and Japanese students. Between 1959 and 1961, he served in the military in Germany. And from 61 to 64, after he got out, he hitchhiked across Europe, where he lived with the Roma in Yugoslavia. He connected with Palestinian refugees who schooled him on the liberation struggle in Palestine. He organized with African representatives of the ANC in Denmark, where they prevented the unloading of cargo from a South African ship and on the docks there. He hung out with Algerians in Morocco and Sudanese revolutionaries. Needless to say, when Terry came back to the States and he landed in New York City in 1964, the FBI was already waiting for him. After a few years back in Los Angeles, he moved up to San Francisco in 1967, in the summer of 1967, and he joined the Black Panther Party. There were only about 20 people in the party at the time, before things blew up. And from there, he started doing anti-draft work. He started organizing with Yuri Kochiyama. And in the fall of 67, he enrolled at State, got involved in the Black Student Union, and became a member of the Central Committee. In fact, he was the one who pushed for a Central Committee. And it was Terry, this is the coming to a close here, who was the central advocate for the establishment of a Third World Liberation Front, because he was a Marxist and he recognized the necessity of Third World unity. In an interview with me, he said, "Our whole concept from the beginning was internationalism." I love this brother. But as the great African revolutionary Amilcar Cabral famously said, "Tell no lies, mask no difficulties, mistakes, failures, claim no easy victories." Because the decision to form or join the Third World Liberation Front was not unanimous. Some weren't excited about working together. And this was it's a political question. It was a political question then, it's a political question now. Some felt to reach out and to include others would water down, would take attention away from their own specific issues, or it might alienate folks within their constituencies. We got our own problems, they would say. But others, like Terry, like Nesbitt Crutchfield, like Jack Alexis, felt it was imperative to broaden the struggle and that the task at hand required people to struggle together. Now, by late 1967, early 1968, the close relationship between the Black Student Union and the Panthers, which now were, after the arrest of Huey Newton, the membership was exploding not only in the Bay, but across the country, mitigated some of that resistance. Here we have a picture of George Murray. George Murray was part of the Black Student Union. He was a graduate student. He was a teacher here, but he had now risen within the ranks of the party to become Minister of Education. During the summer of 1968, Murray traveled to Havana as a guest of OSPAL, which stands for the Organization of Solidarity of the Peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, who were sponsoring an internationalist gathering dedicated to the solidarity with the struggle of Afro-American people. And you can see the poster right here from that meeting. The very concept of a Third World Liberation Front drew upon internationalism, drew upon the revolutionary movements bubbling up across the global South. Hung in the lobby of the BSU office, as soon as you entered the student space, was the bright flag of the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. Mao Zedong famously sent a letter to the BSU. The tactic that the BSU and the TWLF employed, that is the strike, was directly inspired by the National Liberation Front of Algeria, who had organized a famous strike depicted in the classic film Battle of Algiers. The point I'm making here is that the BSU, the TWLF studied struggles taking place around the globe. They stood in solidarity with those struggles, and they understood themselves as our struggles as fundamentally interwoven. As I say, however, initially it wasn't a popular idea. Despite the sharp arguments made by people like Terry, there were still those who opposed opening outwards to others. But the experiment was committed to, and it was through struggle, through mutual struggle, that first trust, and then through fits and starts, unity was built. For Terry, no matter how difficult it may be, the process may be, internationalism was a bedrock principle of the struggle. Now, I'm gonna really condense here because I only got a couple of minutes, but I was gonna do this whole thing about the meaning of ethnic studies, and maybe I can come back to that. If we have Q&A, I don't know. But two concepts were really significant. Self-determination, I'm gonna skip. I wanna come back, I wanna end with solidarity, particularly as it relates to Swana communities and Palestine. Now, on the one hand, the Third World Liberation Front signaled a historic unity, as I've been talking about, between communities of color, premised upon internationalism. It was a solidarity solidified by politics and by personal relationships. But to those who might argue that Arab Americans were not participants in the struggle for ethnic studies, it's important to recognize that just because Arab Americans or Swana organizations were not formal members of the TWLF is not to say they weren't involved. I mean this in two ways. On the one hand, the Arab American Association, I got 1 minute, was very involved on the campus going all the way back to 1962. And the Arab American Association worked with the Black Student Union, worked with the Third World Liberation Front. As well, there was a group called the Iranian Student Association that worked in partnership with the BSU and the TWLF throughout. So Swana communities were absolutely present and part of the network of relationships that would give birth to ethnic studies. But as I've been saying, Arab American studies forms a vital component of ethnic studies for another reason, a political reason. As Terry's life and commitment show, internationalism was a bedrock principle. It was reflected in the very name of the wider coalition, Third World Liberation Front. This vision encompassed communities of color here in the belly of the beast and internationally, all those struggling for oppressed peoples. So when the Third World Liberation Front stated in the spring of 1968, quote, "We have decided to fuse ourselves with the masses of third world people, which are the majority of the world's peoples, to create through struggles a new humanity, a new humanism, a new world consciousness, and within that context, collectively control our destinies." They were inherently including Arab Americans and especially Palestinians. To conclude, when the strike settled in the spring of 1969, Nesbitt Crutchfield of the Third World Liberation Front and the BSU, he concluded in this interview that the strike is over, but the struggle continues. The fight today over a liberated ethnic studies curriculum, over Arab American studies, to determine what constitutes ethnic studies, the inclusion of Arab American studies is testament to this fact. Self-determination and solidarity of an internationalist and anti-imperialist variety are still central to our fight, and not least to winning. And that revolutionary solidarity means the most, not when it's easy, not when it's convenient, but rather in moments when it is especially difficult or unpopular, as we often see in the struggle for liberation of Palestine, or most recently in the defense of the Cuban Revolution. But as Terry would say, and I'll close with this, if you ain't got principles, you ain't got nothing. Thank you. Sorry for going a little over.
No, that was amazing. Thank you, Jason. That was great. If you ain't got principles, you ain't got nothing. That's what you just said.
That's what I said.
Oh, and those
that's what Terry said. I should say that's what Terry said.
Well, that's what Terry said. And those two principles, self-determination and solidarity of an international and anti-imperialist orientation. Thank you for centering us and getting us started, because I wish we could have seen the full version of this, and I feel like I need to have you back in some kind of way capacity, because and I'm looking forward to this book of yours. But Lupe, I'm hoping that you could also take us through a conversation around multicultural ed and ethnic studies and why that matters, like the difference between those two, because sometimes we see that there may be some conflation of that. And then, take us through that, and then we can come back to the Q&A and dig more deeply if once we have time. Yep.
Absolutely. I will do my best to do that. And I think the biggest struggle for me is going to be to speak slowly. I tend to speak really, really quickly. So I'm gonna try not to do that today. Excuse me. I need water nearby. My name is Guadalupe Carrasco Cardona, and I go by she, her, ella. I'm coming to you from Tongva Land, East Los Angeles, Yangna, Los Angeles. And so, yeah, I'm going to share a little bit about that. I'm going to do my best to do that in a short amount of time. So essentially, I kind of want to contextualize some of this this more recent fight for ethnic studies as it pertains to what's going on here in California and what I'm seeing is happening on a national scale. I was one of the 18 members of the California Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Advisory Committee, among others who are here today in the audience as well. And so there were a lot of things that we were fighting for. One of them was for the time to ensure that we were truly capturing an ethnic studies model curriculum that would honor the, the discipline and the four racialized, excuse me, all of a sudden that happens. The four racialized ethnic disciplines that comprise ethnic studies. And so what we were doing in that little short period of time that they gave us was making sure that we were centering and reclaiming voices of peoples and communities of color, including Native voices, of course, Asian American studies, which includes, as Jason was saying before, that Arab American and Palestinian voice, Chicanx Latinx studies, African American studies, and American Indian and Native American studies. If you go back and you look at the long history and trajectory of ethnic studies, you're going to see that those are the four racialized ethnic groups that comprise ethnic studies. We were trying to critically analyze global white supremacy, US imperialism and colonialism. We were making sure that indigeneity, solidarity, international liberation, and unity were part of the practices that we were pushing forward, and also the principles. We were enacting theories and practices of organizing, grassroots organizing, resistance, and liberation to eliminate racism, white supremacy, and other forms of oppression. So those are the intersectionalities. We were really wanting to ensure that we're practicing anti-racist pedagogy, critical, responsive, and sustaining and critical pedagogical practices. We really wanted to make sure that we were embedding inquiry-based learning and community responsive practices, such as abolitionist teaching, YPAR, social emotional learning techniques as instructional strategies. We wanted to make sure that we're stressing empathy, humanism, collectivism, radical healing, community through connecting through community cultural wealth, and counter stories of people of color and Native people to the greater community. So in an extremely short period of time, we were really trying to make sure to include all of this in the model curriculum and in the not just in the content, but also in what we were, in terms of the pedagogy, right? Making sure that this was all part and parcel of it. And we really didn't have enough time. So it was incomplete, but still rather good, especially compared to what it became. But nonetheless, pushback ensued, right? Pushback by right-wing, pushback by Zionist, people who had, positions of power and were able to get into the process, right? And in getting into the process with that, with their power, right? Which was in them being able to do so actually sort of proved correct what we were working against, right? It kind of showed that those power structures and that white privilege does exist, white supremacy and white privilege does exist. And so when this improvement of the curriculum was happening, those of us who were part of the model curriculum, who were by and large people of color who came from the 4 racialized ethnic groups that comprise ethnic studies, were not allowed to be a part of the process. What we saw was that the process of improving, and I use these air quotes, right, to say improving the curriculum, what they were folks that were not, from the communities of color, not in the grassroots sense of it, not in the, professional sense of, educators of ethnic studies. They were not scholars of ethnic studies. They were nowhere in any of the definitions of someone who would be considered to be an expert in ethnic studies. Nonetheless, they came in and started tweaking and changing the curriculum to the point that what we saw was it became more of a multicultural studies model curriculum. And so I'm going to kind of outline some of the things that we saw in the changes to the model curriculum. And so some of what we saw was that they were wanting to center all marginalized people instead of sticking to the, BIPOC and Native American voices. They wanted to be, they were using words like inclusivity and diversity instead of words like self-determination, right? They were talking about multiple perspectives as opposed to counter narratives as told by BIPOC people and Native American intersectional voices. They were talking about concepts like tolerance, instead of concepts like community-driven or abolitionist teaching, anti-imperialist, decolonial, and liberatory. They were talking about things that were very ahistorical, as what we're seeing right now with the pushback with critical race theory, versus things like global interconnectedness, historical contextualization, and internationalist solidarity, right? That's the big fear, that internationalist solidarity. They talk about anti-bias, and we talk about anti-racist, right? And so multiculturalism often focuses on anti-bias education that encourages fairness and centers individual beliefs. And that's an important one, right? Individual beliefs about diverse groups being accepted, whereas ethnic studies focuses on dismantling racism through systems that uphold white supremacy and colonization. And so what I'm going to do right now in the chat, I'm going to put a couple of resources for you to where you can find information, some really good graphics on the difference between multicultural education versus ethnic studies. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's important for us to be very clear on the difference between multiculturalism and ethnic studies. And that is because a lot of times, the words that are used to describe ethnic studies are more on that multiculturalism side. And it's not to say that those are necessarily bad things, but we have to be very clear that multiculturalism is not ethnic studies, right? And what we're seeing is, like in the state of California, for instance, we have resolutions that have been passed in many districts. We've seen legislation that has been passed statewide, for instance, for the CSU system. We're seeing policy that's being passed for the community colleges, and very likely, very soon, we're going to see a statewide bill get passed for ethnic studies in the entire state of California. And these pieces of legislation, are very clear in saying that they're asking for ethnic studies, not multicultural studies. So we need to be able to see when curriculum is actually being rolled out, that they are indeed that they're indeed using the concepts and the principles of ethnic studies. And so I know here in the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is a huge school district of many children, mostly children, BIPOC and Native American children. What we're seeing is that the district is pushing back on us and the task force that has been formed with United Teachers Los Angeles to really, they are not really allowing us to kind of ensure that what actually rolls out in the classroom is ethnic studies. What we're seeing is what they have on the books and what they are standing by as ethnic studies is actually multicultural studies. And this is problematic, because what we're seeing is that folks who have, do not have that background, that do not know what, like for instance, what was just presented in Jason's presentation, they do not have this background knowledge of international solidarity, of, anti-imperialism. And so they're really promoting something that is not ethnic studies. And so I'm also going to put a few other links into the chat so that folks can see the guiding principles of ethnic studies as the Liberated Ethnic Studies model curriculum has framed them, along with sample ideas of lessons that could be taught that would include that guiding principle and not a multicultural element of it. And so that's another thing too. It's really important for us to have knowledge of the difference between multicultural studies and actual ethnic studies, because sometimes you can have a really good lesson and with a small tweak, you can move from one to the other. So my 10 minutes is up. I'm going to go ahead and put some more links into the chat, and I welcome folks to check those resources out and reach out to us if you have any other questions. Thank you all. And I apologize for speaking too fast. I think I did a few times.
Thank you, Lupe. We'll be taking some pauses throughout just so that we can make sure that everyone is able to keep up. Jesus, I see you have a hand raised, and it's not that we are ignoring you. If you don't mind, we would like to get through.
I'm using the phone, and to see the app, I have to click on it. So.
Oh, okay.
Oh, don't mind me. Yeah, sorry.
All right.
My bad.
No problem. All right, Mel.
Okay, thank you, Lupe. We now want to hear from Ashlyn. Can you speak more about your work and the solidarity work you have helped build?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Ashlyn. So, and just to kind of introduce myself a little bit again. Yeah, I'm 13 years old and I am a student fashion designer and an accidental activist.
I'm so sorry,
and,
Ashlyn. Could you
yeah.
speak a little louder for the interpreters? It's hard to hear you.
Okay.
So sorry.
All right, let me just redo that. Hi everyone. So, just to introduce myself a little bit again, my name is Ashlyn. So, and I'm 13 years old. I'm a student, fashion designer, and accidental activist. And just like to kind of speak about some of the work that I've done. I only started doing this like a couple of months ago, back in February. And it was like really what motivated me was just seeing those videos of so many Asian elders getting pushed on the news just over and over again. And I thought that I had to do something. And so I actually was really inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the amazing protests that they have done and all of the amazing work that they've done. And I decided that I could do something similar and I could organize a rally. So I organized my first rally back in February. And that back then, I think it was definitely like a topic that not many people knew about. And it's just like kind of not like, I know that like it's definitely like just something that is not like spotlighted. And I thought that maybe I could just kind of do this rally just to kind of create a platform for, you know, people to share their stories, and people to tell their story. And I really wanted to kind of also raise awareness because not many people knew about it. So that's kind of when it all started. And I've been really trying to also do a lot of solidarity between, kind of create a solidarity between the Black and Asian community. I think that like, especially now and like not just like recently, but just in history, there's been a lot of like tension between the Black and Asian community. And I think that it's kind of creating that better understanding with one another, kind of creating a new chapter. And I think that's really what is so important about solidarity, is just being able to work together and be there for one another, instead of kind of like comparing issues. I think that, I actually also organized another rally, but it was the Gold and Black Unity rally, which was all about kind of creating a new chapter for the Black and Asian community, and kind of being able to just be with one another, being in a space together where we can work together to solve these issues. And I think that like, especially as a youth, I think there are, just to speak a little more about ethnic studies, I have never learned any of like the things that I learn now, back when I at school, all of these like conferences and all of these interviews and just like speaking to these people at rallies, just made me learn so much more about my own culture than I've ever had at school. And I think it's really important that we are able to kind of and that we are able to just kind of create this space at school where we are allowed to learn about ourselves, our peers, just kind of like learning about each other, and just to create that like compassion, like just kind of like I feel like if being able to do like being able to implement these ethnic studies or these studies about different cultures or your own culture, kind of will like be able to kind of like stop all of these incidents from happening in the future, because now you're seeing people and you know them and they're not so foreign to they're not so foreign to you. And I think it's really important to kind of learn about your own culture too, just to create that like it just kind of creates that culture identity and kind of makes you proud of who you are. And I think that's really important, especially for youth, I think too, just at a young age, learning about these things is really important, because it's kind of like when you're young, it's kind of like a blank sheet, and like you don't really the racism is taught, right? And I think that's why at a younger age you want to learn about other cultures, learn about anti-racism, so you grow up to be just like a person who knows other cultures, who knows your own culture. And it's just kind of like a whole community kind of coming together. And I think that's just like what solidarity means too, just coming together with other cultures, other communities, and creating that like allyship and being able to work with them. So I'm going to save a little bit of time for a video, but did you want to should I share, or is somebody else going to share this? I really hope to unite the Asian and Black community, as well as Latinx and all people of color. So I really want to build a new chapter with this event.
So my name is Ashlyn So. I'm 13 years old, and I'm a fashion designer, middle schooler, and an accidental activist. I wanted to fight for my grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Today, we are in a state of emergency. While putting on a mask only takes a few minutes on an airplane, healing our emotional wounds will take much longer. My personal healing is through actions and coming together. Racism is learned and taught, and now we need to unlearn and reteach.
Unite in love! 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 The path to solidarity and unity and justice, it's a long road. But the thing is, we can't give up. We need to keep walking down that road. But then when I meet people like Ashlyn, they are the ones that give me hope and faith in humanity. They give me reason to keep fighting. They give me purpose and meaning. I am not going to let anyone, anything, or any external factors make me deviate from my path of bringing unity and solidarity amongst all people.
We have been fighting segregation and we have been fighting racism together, living in communities, birthing each other's babies, praying together, making each other food, healing ourselves from the sick. Let's be clear, we are community.
Please educate each other on your thoughts, your feelings, your history, your culture, your tradition, your story. Inspire and amplify each other's voices. It takes all of us coming together, uniting in love, in solidarity, in community.
The solidarity is not a noun, it is a verb. Unity is action. It's not just something that's an idea.
If Ashley can do it, you know, like, why can't we get our own stuff together? Like, the 13-year-old can get it together. It makes me very hopeful, and she just does it. So we should take after her and do that too.
But the message was to lead with love. The message has always been to lead with love, to spread love, to share the positivity and come together to unite together.
So imagine when Asian and Black people come together thoroughly in San Francisco. Imagine the political change we can make in our school systems if we came together, right?
We have so much in common with each other.
So many people are really stepping up, and I think it's just that small step that can really make a huge change. I want to really empower and inspire the youth to come out and speak up, tell it to everybody, tell the story, and yeah, share it with the world.
We're here right now, we're here to support each other, and that's what we're gonna do. I'm so proud of Ashlyn. A 13-year-old child put this together because she sees that there's a problem and we need to do better for our youth. If it's not for anybody else, it's for our youth. They don't need to come and feel unsafe walking in their own skin like we don't. Black and Asian solidarity. I'm out.
I don't know, maybe y'all should come off mute and just give it up for Ashlyn. If y'all can just come off mute and just shout out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashlyn.
Woo!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you for all this. Yeah, it's really amazing to see all the speakers today.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. We now want to hear from Laura. Can you speak more on raising awareness about the nature of attacks on ethnic studies and the links to attacks on critical race theory and what's at stake.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm honored to be on this panel with such brilliant comrades. I'm speaking to you from Ohlone territory, and again, my name is Lara Kiswani. I'll be building on the inspiring words that Ashlyn shared with us in terms of the power and necessity of organizing and solidarity. As the other speakers mentioned, ethnic studies has been under attack essentially since its inception, and for good reason. It situates education within a critical perspective of race and power. So the same forces that challenged it in the 60s are the ones challenging it today, right-wing and racist forces, those not wanting to get at the heart of the contradictions of our society, poverty, war, racism, rooted in structures of imperialism and colonialism. So I want to tell the story of the fight for ethnic studies as a way in California, as a way to illustrate what is at stake and what is made possible through our collective organizing. As Lupe mentioned, the California State Board of Education rubber stamped just this March 18th, 2021, a whitewashed anti-Palestinian ethnic studies model curriculum in the face of massive public outrage. The California State Assembly called for the creation of a state-approved high school ethnic studies model curriculum that school districts could use across the state of California. And to complete this work, as Lupe mentioned, a group of practitioners like Lupe came together to oversee its creation. They worked for 8 months to produce over 550-page document, and it was clearly defined what their task was, right? And there was a system to receive public comment and feedback all along. And in the 11th hour, the summer of 2019, that's when the right-wing backlash ensued, pressuring decision makers to undermine the work of the experts. The right-wing backlash specifically targeted the inclusion of Arab American studies as an extension of Asian American studies. Led by essentially the pro-Israel interest groups, they succeeded in erasing Arab American studies. And as always, our communities organized and worked hand in hand with the original writers, with scholars, with community organizations to launch the Save Arab American Studies Coalition. And we understood then, as we understand now, that the attack on Palestine was essentially an attack on ethnic studies. So in response to our organizing, the California Department of Education later agreed to reinsert Arab American studies into the Asian American studies section. But instead, not only did they relegate a whitewashed Arab American studies lesson plan to the appendix alongside a pro-Israel Jewish lesson plan, they also gutted the entire curriculum. So despite our coalition mobilizing tens of thousands of public comments in support of an authentic ethnic studies that includes Palestine, despite the founders of ethnic studies, like Terry Collins, the veterans of the '68 student strike, condemning the revisions to the original curriculum and echoing that Palestine is ethnic studies, despite that one of the most powerful teachers unions, the California Teachers Association, opposed the curriculum. All of that, we ended up with this insulting document. And this included support on our end from the Arab American Studies Association, Association of Asian American Studies, alongside scholars like Angela Davis, Cornel West, Mark Lamont Hill, Robin Kelly, Barbara Ransby. Everyone opposed this gutted curriculum, and policymakers decided to capitulate to white, Zionist, right-wing interest groups. The approved curriculum abandoned ethnic studies principles in pedagogy, the critical edge of ethnic studies, the analysis and critique of racism and other systems of oppression were all sanitized, and all mention of Palestine have been erased. But even further, embedded in the approved curriculum is reference to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which essentially misrepresents critique and criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. So I want to get into, and Jason laid the foundation for this, for the answer to this question. Why was the inclusion of Palestine so controversial to politicians and political interest groups? And I'm just going to quote the statement from the Arab American Studies Association. Palestine crystallizes for students questions of territory, questions of memory, nationalism, settler colonialism, and dispossession, questions of race, class, gender, and sexuality, question of solidarity, agency, interconnection, transnationalism, questions of equity, dignity, and justice. As for students in the US, understanding Palestine also provides a window into understanding their own experience of racialization, the experience of racialization of oppressed people here much more clearly. And as Angela Davis said, the attack on Palestine is the new front of ethnic studies. And arguably, the attack on critical race theory is the new front for education today. What we are witnessing is an all-out assault on working families, students, Black, I see you, Jody, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. What started out as an attack on Palestine and the inclusion of Arab American studies by the attack by pro-Israel interest groups evolved into a coalescing of pro-Israel and other right-wing interest groups and politicians sanitizing ethnic studies and critique of race and power. Because fundamentally, it's not about Palestine. It's about what the movement for Palestinian liberation represents. It's about the ongoing anti-colonial struggle against US imperialism, against racial capitalism, against global militarism. It's about the decolonial liberatory, internationalist potential of our movements. And all along the way, in this fight for the California ethnic studies, Arab and Palestinian communities, we had to prove we belonged in ethnic studies. We had endless meetings with our scholars, heads of academic associations, practitioners, community leaders, to convince the Department of Education and politicians that had the power to define ethnic studies, what ethnic studies is, how Palestine fits in, what even Arab American studies means. The irony of us having to prove to decision makers that we belong, to make a case to politicians about the future of a self-determined discipline is absolutely not lost on us. We know as educators, activists, we know our people, we know our histories, we know our struggles, we know our legacies of resistance, and we know what ethnic studies is and isn't. And time again, we are forced to prove we have a place in history. We have a place in the present. And most of the time, in order to win, to shift power, to build grassroots power, we must create our own spaces and seize the spaces that have been taken from us. That is what we are witnessing today in the fight for ethnic studies and for critical race theory. But that's not the end of the story. And as was mentioned earlier, the story begins and ends with solidarity. That's what birthed ethnic studies. And that is what this campaign to defend ethnic studies is built on and continues to deepen across communities. We've said it before, the solidarity that's been built during this fight will outlast any policy, any shelved curriculum, and it will shape what's possible for the future of our communities. It's not only a moral imperative to act in solidarity, to support the human rights of all people and the liberation struggles of all people. It's necessary if we're going to win. Our opposition understands that well. That's why they coordinate with one another. As we're seeing with the attack on critical race theory, on ethnic studies, on Palestine, they have shared interest and they have been able to consolidate power because they are committed to consolidating power, to exploiting more people, to extracting more resources. We too need to work together to shift power, to actually build power, to defend our people and to win. And very simply put, the practice of solidarity is what's going to make change possible. It's not just about the parallels. It's not just about our comparisons. It's actually about our shared political visions and liberation projects. It's about our collective strategies. So today we're continuing to build with teachers, families, and communities across the United States who are committed to defending and advancing ethnic studies across the United States. And here in California, we know that statewide curriculum, it's not mandatory. Therefore, teachers have options, including the option to adhere to the fidelity of ethnic studies and to use an alternative curriculum. So Lupe and others and the other original writers of the curriculum are developing a liberatory ethnic studies model curriculum that's anti-racist, that encourages students to see themselves as part of movements for social change, to build on knowledge and solidarity. And this curriculum will be offered to teachers everywhere. So we're launching this weekend, alongside Free Minds, Free People, the Liberated Ethnic Studies Coalition, the National Liberated Ethnic Studies Coalition. And we're inviting all of you guys to join us and tell your friends, your students, your children, your families, your neighbors, to join the People's Assembly tomorrow, where we're gonna organize ourselves, because that's what it's gonna take to organize and build solidarity. So as we organize to defend ethnic studies and to bring down that whitewashed racist curriculum, we are also building up alternatives. We are shaping the future of what is made possible for our communities in this moment. Today, there is consensus across progressive movements that An attack on Palestine is in fact an attack on all movements for justice, and we can definitively say that consensus now extends through communities of anti-racist teachers and scholars. So we know now that we must always fight for our own power in the face of oppressive power. Time and time again, we relearn this lesson, that we also must demand more. We must dream more and fight for what is possible. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. I'm just going to remind everyone to pause in between your sentences. The interpreters are trying to keep up. So we have ASL and our Spanish interpreters, translators are trying to keep up. So please. So with that, Jesse, if you can take us into thinking about organizing for and to teach ethnic studies, and lay the groundwork for our assembly that we have planned for tomorrow, our FMFP, Free Minds, Free People, People's Assembly tomorrow. So that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Okaikor. Really appreciate the invitation to join this incredible panel. I've really just learned so much already this morning from everyone who has spoken, and just been really inspired by you all, especially Ashlyn this morning. So thank you for your words. My name is Jesse Hagopian. I'm coming to you all from occupied Coast Salish and Duwamish land, also known as Seattle. You know, settler colonialism took this land over, and even though our city is named after a Duwamish chief, the Duwamish people still don't have federal recognition, and they are in a struggle for those rights right now. And now, wait a minute. If I was one state over in Idaho, or if I was in Iowa or one of the 8 states where a bill recently passed banning the teaching of structural racism, it might not even be legal for me to have that discussion about settler colonialism in my classroom, right? And the genocide of Native American people, right? That's really how far things have gone in this country these days. You know, in Idaho, Iowa, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, New Hampshire, Arizona, South Carolina, it is literally illegal to teach the truth to children, right? So there are 27 states right now that have introduced legislation that would require teachers to lie to students about structural racism and other forms of oppression. Heterosexism and sexism and other forms of oppression are also interwoven in these bills. And the state boards in Florida and in Georgia and Utah and Oklahoma have introduced guidelines that ban an honest account of the role of racism in our society. And this is having real consequences already. A teacher in Tennessee was fired for assigning a Ta-Nehisi Coates essay and a poem by Kayla Janae Lacey about white privilege. And other teachers have been fired as well. A teacher in Florida for putting up a Black Lives Matter flag. But these laws aren't just impacting educators where the laws have passed, because even in states where there isn't yet a bill, this legislation is emboldening people to attack ethnic studies and social justice teaching. I don't know if people saw this story, but in the Tri-Cities area of Washington State, just a couple hours south of where I live, a teacher had physical threats made against them for signing the Zen Education Project's pledge to teach the truth regardless of the law. And, you know, hundreds of teachers around the country have already been harassed by white parents and school board members. And superintendents for signing the pledge to teach the truth or teaching anti-racist lessons. But I want to be real clear about something. This attack on anti-racist teaching is a sign that the racists are really scared, y'all. They are frightened right now. And you can tell a scared racist because when they can't win a debate, when they can't win a debate using the facts of American history, they just try to make it illegal for you to say or teach anything that challenges them, right? And so what are they scared of? They are scared that all of you in this room right here are organizing, right? They're scared of the ethnic studies movement. They see the gains that are being made in classrooms across the country. They're scared of the fact that the Black Lives Matter at School movement tripled in size last year. I think maybe what scares them the most is the solidarity, right, that we've been hearing about between Palestinian and Black and Asian and BIPOC people. In fact, in Idaho, the bill declares that social justice ideology poses a grave threat to America and to the American way of life, right? And I think that what really triggered their fear was the uprising that happened last spring and summer in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and Ahmaud Arbery and so many others. Young people took to the streets, they linked arms, and they said, we are going to shake this country to its core, and we're going to teach this nation about structural racism. And for all this hand-wringing about learning loss that we've heard, this deficit model that they apply to our youth, especially our Black and brown youth, saying they're hopelessly behind because of remote schooling, I think we need to look at the incredible education that our youth got and the huge advancement in understanding of our society that they received from participating in that uprising. And not only were they learning, but they became the nation's greatest teacher in my lifetime about the issues that impact us the most. But long before a few clueless politicians found critical race theory to vilify, people all over the country have been fighting for ethnic studies and liberatory education and anti-racist pedagogy. And that struggle in Seattle has been intense and really challenging at times and inspiring. We've had a powerful coalition of educators and students and parents who won the ethnic studies department just a few years ago in this city. People like Tracy Castro Gill and John Greenberg and Rita Green and the youth of the NAACP Council and Black student unions came together to force the district to implement ethnic studies, and incredible educators like Shraddha Shrude have taken up that fight. My colleague at Garfield High School teaches ethnic studies math, and they built the Washington Ethnic Studies Now organization. And, you know, they have been engaged in this long and sometimes painful battle. They got Tracy to be the director of the Ethnic Studies Department, but then she was pushed out. But the organizing continues. And during the uprising last summer, we held a Black Education Now rally to demand more support for ethnic studies and an additional Black Studies department. And I'm proud to say that we just won the Black Studies department here in the Seattle Public Schools. And I just want to begin to wrap up by talking about what's at stake in this struggle, because I want to be clear that the right is attempting to put its knee on the neck of ethnic studies and anti-racist teaching. And this choking of anti-racism in the curriculum is not, as we hear liberals often argue, just antics or just a distraction from the real issues. I think instead we have to understand what's happening with these bills across the country is attempted episystemicide, right? The killing or silencing or annihilation of entire systems of knowledge. Knowledge is a highly regulated in our society. And in order to maintain an inequitable society like ours, in order to maintain an American capitalist system where you can have 5 people that have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion people on the planet, you have to ban ethnic studies and anti-racist teaching, right? And that's really, I think, what's at stake here. They want to throw ethnic studies and anti-racist teaching down the memory hole and replace it with the violence of organized forgetting. But I think we have to remember the struggles from San Francisco State. We have to remember the struggle in Tucson, Arizona for the Raza Studies program that came under attack, and they borrowed much of the language from the bills banning that program in this new attack on critical race theory. And so I just want to end by encouraging everybody to join this struggle and pointing out that on August 27th through the 29th, there's a weekend of action being co-organized by the Zinn Education Project, Black Lives Matter at School, and the African American Policy Forum to call on people to go to historic sites and organize rallies to teach the truth. And then on October 14th, George Floyd's birthday, we're calling on everybody to teach lessons about structural racism, even in states where that's illegal, and to participate in civil disobedience by teaching the truth to students. And I'll just end with the words of Septi McClark when she said, "I believe unconditionally in the ability of people to respond when they are told the truth. We need to be taught to study rather than to believe, to inquire rather than to affirm." Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. If everyone could just come off mute to give a round of applause to all of our plenary speakers. They have all been fire. I don't know about you, but I'm sitting here trying to take notes and I can't stop. I'm sorry. I don't know about anyone else.
Yeah, but this direction send me to 57.
But I was trying to take notes and could not keep up. So we have about 6 more minutes. I would love for us to maybe dig a little bit more deeply into, just in the little bit of time that we have, about what it will take for us to build this international solidarity and to hold to those principles, the original principles that were gifted to us around self-determination and international solidarity. What will it take for us? If we can just hear from a couple and then we'll wrap up. Yes, go ahead, Jason.
I'll be very, very brief. I think one of the things that we need to do is break out of, is be aware of the silos that we are living within. Sometimes I think we're not aware of the silos we're in. And I mean that in regards to, as Jesse was saying, I think it's very important for us to connect struggles around education with the, broader struggles for things like voter suppression, right? Prison industrial complex, struggles in labor. We need to break out of just the quote unquote educational sphere, because all of these are connected. But since we're on the subject of international solidarity, we need to develop concrete relationships with comrades in other parts of the world. We have something to learn from them. I think it's a uniquely US phenomena where we think we have all the answers, right? And we have comrades in Chile, we have comrades in Mexico, we have comrades in many places of the world that have much to teach us, and building those relationships needs to be a priority.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I'll just say that today is a great example of what's needed in order to do this well. So we have a panel on transnational solidarity with speakers from around the world talking about education so we can learn from them. So we have opportunities today to learn and put into practice what Jason just mentioned. We also have opportunities tomorrow to show up to the People's Assembly at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and actually build together, to organize together. What it's going to take is organizing. And what it's going to take is deep, deep solidarity in that organizing. And that's what it's going to take to build power. It's not just going to happen. It's not just going to happen in the classroom. It's not going to just happen in the community. It actually has to happen together. So I think this weekend is a great example of what it'll take. And I'm excited for what's going to come of it.
Thank you, Lara. Yes, please come to the panel. We're going to have folks from Mexico, South Africa, New Zealand, and Brazil speaking. And also right after, we also have an international DJ for our Freedom Cafe. So please come through if you can to also get some international music vibes if y'all feeling it. But Ashlyn, I don't know, I think Ashlyn too has provided an example for us too as well. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit and just talk about, what do you think, maybe in a couple of sentences or so, about what do you think it will take for us to do this?
I think that, I think that it'll take just kind of everybody speaking from so many different places about this, just kind of being talking to not only your school boards, but the leaders and from different states all over, and just making an impact nationally. I think that's what really what it takes to kind of be able to implement on these ethnic studies. I think that just talking to your school board too is just the first step that you can take. I think that just kind of making an impact from all over is just, I think, the way to kind of be able to implement these things.
Thank you, Ashlyn. You've got it all. You're doing amazing work. So we appreciate that. Anyone else before we wrap up our session? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody so much for joining us. Please come out tomorrow. Hang out with us later today. I'm going to drop the link for our DJ, our music session, just so that you all can make it through. Hopefully you'll be there. That's our link. And party with us for a little bit before our panel begins, our international panel. And organize, folks. I think this is how we're going to be able to push and continue to see and reach those principles and center those principles of self-determination and this transnational and internationalist orientation for how we build across borders and push back against the attacks that are designed to separate, divide, and dehumanize all of us. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Mel, did you have any last words you wanted to say?
I thought it was really good, and I thought Ashlyn was amazing, and I thought everyone did really good.
So that's how we're ending it, folks.